Hi, everyone, and welcome to Inside Israel. I'm Joel Chasnoff, coming to you tonight from Ra'anana, my home, just outside of Tel Aviv. Tonight's episode is called CBA, Cost Benefit Analysis. And what I want to do tonight is really break down the events of the week, the major events of the week, where Israel took out one leader of Hezbollah and a leader of Hamas was also taken out. We don't know exactly by whom. Israel's been accused of it. It hasn't officially taken responsibility for it. Before we do that, I do need to give you a little apology. Today, in the newsletter that I sent out inviting you to tonight's broadcast, I mentioned that Hezbollah leader Fuad Shukr was eliminated in Lebanon, and that Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh was taken out in Tel Aviv. I have no idea why I wrote Tel Aviv in that newsletter email. It's obviously Tehran. That's the whole gist of the story, that he was taken out in Iranian territory. The one excuse I might have is that we are under so much stress here in Israel between the war that we're expecting really any day now on Israeli soil. I'm looking right now at one, two, three, four, five, 6 times 6, 36 bottles of water that we have stacked up for the next few days. Cans of beans, corn, tuna, some crackers, everything we're anticipating for the attack that we all believe is on the way. So once in a while, we're going to make these little mistakes, including mistakenly writing Tel Aviv instead of Tehran. So I really do apologize for doing that. A lot of you emailed back and said, "Hey, you goofed. It's actually Tehran, not Tel Aviv." Some of you rely on me as your main source of news, and I'm really honored that you do. And you emailed that you were appalled that such a high-level Hamas terrorist was able to get into Tel Aviv. And to you, listeners, I am most apologetic because you're relying on me for the facts, and I flubbed it in this case. But if nothing else, I'm always going to tell you the truth and take responsibility when I make a blunder. So hopefully, apology is accepted, and we will move on. But yeah, that is what we are going to do tonight. I'm going to do a cost-benefit analysis of these two eliminations. And if you're on my newsletter, Hebrew is Magic, you'll know that in the rest of the world, they were calling these assassinations when Israel took out Fuad Shukr, the commander of Hezbollah, pretty much the chief of staff of Hezbollah, the highest ranking commander. And it's assumed that Israel was the one who eliminated Ismail Haniyeh, who was the political leader of Hamas. And like I said, the rest of the world calls these assassinations, but here in Israel, we call this chisul or chisulim, which means eliminations. And I pointed out in the newsletter that there is a difference. An assassination can be simply out of ideology or political clashes, whereas a chisul, an elimination, really does serve a purpose. In this case, well, we're going to look at the cost-benefit analysis. I'll tell you what the purposes were. But let's just get that clear as well, that here in Israel, we are not calling these assassinations. We are calling them eliminations, chisulim. And that's been the word that was on everyone's lips in Israel this week. So let's start with the benefits. What are the benefits of Israel's having taken out these two leaders, senior Hezbollah commander Fuad Shukr and Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh? Well, number one, by taking out these leaders, we are diminishing the chances of future terror attacks happening against Israelis. Like I mentioned, Shukr, who is the senior commander of Hezbollah, he's essentially the highest ranking military officer in Hezbollah, was the equivalent of the chief of staff of the IDF, or the five-star general in the United States Army. He is their general, and as such is responsible for coordinating attacks, planning the attacks. So taking him out definitely diminishes Hezbollah's ability to attack us. And likewise with taking out Haniyeh, who is the political leader of Hamas. Now you could say, well, he's the political leader, whereas Sinwar is the on-the-ground leader in Gaza of Hamas. But Haniyeh, as the political leader, he was responsible for gathering money, distributing money. He was the main point of communication to the various Hamas, uh, we'd say skanim, assistants, lieutenants all over the world, really. So to take him out is a definite blow to Hamas's capability to attack Israel in the future. So that's number one. Number two, taking out these two leaders is a sign to other, not just leaders, but militants in Hamas and Hezbollah, that we will find you and we will take you out as well. It applies to all militants, but especially to other leaders of these terrorist organizations, that no one is safe, that anyone can be and will be found eventually. From what I heard, Shukr was in an apartment with his lover at the time that the missile came into his apartment and blew him up. So you would think that he would be in a private space, a safe space when he was with his lover, if this is indeed the case, which is what I'm hearing from soldiers in the know. But no, anywhere you are, we will find you. So that's number two. It's a sign to other leadership. Number three, this is a blow to their morale, to Hamas and Hezbollah. First of all, simply that their leaders are being picked off one by one. And these are not the first time that we have targeted leaders. We have had many high-profile leaders in Hamas, Hezbollah that we have taken out over the past month in higher numbers, but over the course of the past few months in general. So it's a blow to their morale that we are able to find them and kill them. But it's also deeply, deeply humiliating, because what it shows is that there are cracks in their own militaries, in their own organizations. In the case of Haniyeh, who is the Hamas political leader who was killed in Iran, apparently the word in Israel is that he was blown up by a bomb that was smuggled into the room where he would be staying 2 months ago, and that this was planted by members of the IRGC. This is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. This is the elite forces of Iran. And they were the ones that the Mossad, Israel's secret service, were able to get to and were able to convince them, pay them enough, whatever, to plant this bomb in the room. And so it's deeply humiliating to Iran that they were the ones who assassinated ultimately Haniyeh, the political leader of Hamas. So it's not just that they're losing their leaders, but the nature of how these operations are taking place, that we have penetrated their organizations so deeply that we can essentially have them do our dirty work. And I've said this before, at the risk of sounding like I'm generalizing or being bigoted or racist or whatever, I'm just going to make a statement about cultures here, because you need to understand cultures to understand why this is so important. In the Arab world, saving face is everything. Perception is huge in the Arab world. It's also important in Israel, but in a slightly different way, not in quite as important as a way. In the Arab world, it's very, very important to save face. And we have made them look foolish. And in some ways, that might be what Iran is most upset about right now, that we made them look like fools on the world stage. Think of all their bluster and their speeches and the Ayatollah, all the things he says to rile up the crowds. And here we got the most elite soldiers of his military to blow up the political leader of Hamas. That is a huge blow to them. And that is another benefit to us as well, that we are demonstrating that we have the upper hand. So those are the three benefits in our CBA, our cost benefit analysis. Number one, diminishing their chances of committing more terror attacks, a sign to their leadership that no one is safe. And number three, this blow to their morale by humiliating them. So what are the costs? Well, there really are two major costs, and you can probably guess them on your own, but I'm going to tell you them anyway. Number one, in my opinion, this severely, underline that, severely diminishes our chances of getting a hostage deal done to bring that back the over 100 hostages that are still in Gaza. We need to pause for a second and acknowledge that we are now over 300 days. That's unbelievable. We are now over 300 days that we have Israeli citizens being held hostage in Gaza, including children, an infant who turned 1 year old, women. We were very close to a deal. In fact, we have a deal that was essentially on the table, and the head of the Shin Bet, the chief of staff of the army, the minister of defense, have all been telling Netanyahu that he needs to take this deal. They've been telling him this for the past few weeks. This is not a new development. They're saying that militarily, in terms of defense, taking this deal will not harm Israel. And yet, Netanyahu has refused to take the deal. He's been inserting more and more stipulations that need to be met by Hamas, stipulations that Israel's own negotiators have said are going to kill the chances for the deal. And what I am hearing from those who are very close to the top brass in the army and from soldiers themselves in Gaza is that these two leaders, particularly Haniyeh, the political leader of Hamas, needed to be taken out, but not now. That the timing was wrong. It either needed to happen before, months ago, or it needed to happen after a deal was made. But to take out these leaders, in Hebrew we say davka, meaning specifically right now, is terrible timing in terms of our chances for a deal. And what I'm hearing, and I think I'd have to agree, is that I don't see a deal happening for several weeks, probably several months. I personally believe that we are going to reach October 7th, 2024, the 1 year anniversary of this horrific attack, with most, if not all, of the remaining hostages still in Gaza. And a big reason is this cost that we took out these leaders now when we had a deal on the table. And there's a lot of uproar in Israel about this. So much uproar that Netanyahu, and again, I don't know how much of this is news in outside of Israel, but here it's really big, that Netanyahu is considering firing his minister of defense, Yoav Gallant, who in many polls Israelis are saying is the most trustworthy of all the leaders throughout this conflict, and that he's also thinking of firing the chief of staff of the military, Herzi Halevi, as well as the head of the Shin Bet. Why would he fire them? Because they are speaking out against him, because they are saying that he's mismanaging the hostage deal and that he is, and this is a quote, one of them actually said that he is simply abandoning the hostages. I think it was the head of the Shin Bet, Ronen Bar, who said that. Here's the exact quote. Yes, that in their meeting, a very heated meeting yesterday, one of them said Netanyahu has given up on the hostages. Shehu vitel ala chatufim. And for this reason, he's thinking of firing them. Now, I personally think that if he does fire one or all three of them, this is when you might see the mass rallies out on the streets. I've said that the magic number is 500,000. Right now, we're having about 100,000, maybe a little less, coming out to Tel Aviv on Saturday nights and elsewhere around the country, Jerusalem, Haifa. But as I told you last week, Israelis are getting tired. It's exhausting. The protesting week after week, it's taking a toll on all of us. And it could be that Netanyahu is counting on the fact that just by attrition, we will be worn down. But I'm telling you, if one or more of these leaders are let go, this is when you could see the masses come out to the streets and maybe reach that 500,000. And at that point, you might have members of the ruling coalition step down and remove themselves from the coalition because they will realize that their own political futures are at stake. I'm going to address this in one of the questions that one of you asked, a great question later on, this idea of Likud members stepping down. But that could happen if one or more of the leaders are fired. So that's number one in terms of cost, that we have ruined our chances for a hostage deal, at least in the near term. The second big cost is a retaliatory strike. It is widely, I can't even say expected or even assumed. It's going to happen. I mean, there's no way that we're not going to have some sort of retaliation, if for no other reason than because of what I mentioned before, the importance of saving face in the Arab world. They can't not strike back at us. Now, what is this attack going to look like? I'll tell you, this past weekend, everyone was on edge. People were not going out. I know some people who went to the beach anyway. They said the beach was not nearly as full as it usually is. There were people there, but not like a usual Shabbat Saturday afternoon. Everyone was pretty much staying close to home. Hiking trips, the usual Shabbat trips, were not happening. Our ears were all perked up for the sirens that could come. And we all expected it would come Friday night. And then we expected it would come Saturday and Saturday night. It has not come yet. But again, the operative word is yet. We are expecting that it will come. Now, what am I hearing? From a lot of people, including an officer in the IDF who just got out of reserves that I just spoke to. This officer told me that we're actually not expecting something as big as before. Now, in the headlines, Iran is saying that the attack that's coming is going to be bigger than the one in April. It's going to make Israel weep and regret, and it's going to be huge. But what I'm hearing from this IDF officer, and this is someone I've spoken to before and I do trust, is that it's actually not going to be as severe as Iran is making it out to be for a couple reasons. First of all, Israel has stated that if we are hit, we will retaliate, not like last time where we waited, but we will retaliate immediately and we will retaliate hard. We've used words like reduce Beirut to the Stone Age, return Beirut to the Stone Age, that they've seen what we've done to Gaza. We will do that to Beirut and to other places. There's also the knowledge that we do have U.S. support, and the U.S. has sent a number of warships to the Mediterranean. I think it's clear that the U.S. at least is showing that it would be coming to Israel's aid. And the bottom line is nobody really wants a big war right now. Israel certainly doesn't want it. Hezbollah, despite what they say, doesn't want it, nor does Iran. But the issue is everyone has to save face. So there is going to be some sort of attack. But what I'm hearing is that it's not going to be as big as they're making it out to be because they know that we would retaliate very hard and we would have the United States with us. And they don't want that. So look, God willing, and I know you're with me on this, that this IDF officer is correct and that I am correct right now, but there will be something. The latest intelligence in Israel, this just came out a couple hours ago, is that it will happen on Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, which is the 12th, sundown of the 12th of August going into the 13th. It did strike me as a bit darkly humorous that our enemies seem to know the Jewish calendar better than many Israelis. I did not know the exact date of Tisha B'Av until I saw that Iran, it had leaked, was planning to attack us on the 12th and 13th. They were certainly aware of Yom Kippur. That's in 1973. And in this year, the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War when they attacked on October 7th. So they're very well aware of our calendars. not just because of what it means to us emotionally to be attacked on a holiday, but also the logistics that soldiers, their guard is down a little bit, usually troop forces and numbers are reduced. I can assure you this year it will not be reduced on the 9th of Av or on Yom Kippur. This is still over a week away, the 9th of Av at this point. But that's what we are hearing. In any case, we are on high alert and we expect that something will come. So those are the costs versus the benefits. Now, if we had to choose one, given the benefits and the costs, what would be the correct course of action? Now, I don't know for sure, but I have a hunch that if you were to ask most Israelis what they think, if they could only choose one or the other, I think most Israelis would have said, better not to have taken out those two leaders now, better to have had a hostage deal that brings our hostages home. I say this not just because the polls have shown consistently that over 70% of Israelis believe that bringing home the hostages is the number one priority, but it's just sort of the vibe I get from talking to everyone. I don't know anyone who said that this is a clear-cut good thing that we took out these leaders. Everyone always mentions in the same breath, but I'm very worried about what this will mean for bringing the hostages back home. So that's my hunch. If you were to ask, based on this cost benefit analysis, what most Israelis think, most Israelis would have said, good to have taken out these leaders, but not right now. The timing was incorrect. That said, you cannot argue with the fact that there are benefits to taking out these horrendous monsters. We're going to take a quick break. In about 10 seconds, I'll be back with your questions. This is Inside Israel. I'm Joel Chasnoff. Welcome back to Inside Israel. I'm Joel Chasnoff, again coming to you from Ra'anana this evening. And we're going to go straight to your questions tonight because we had quite a few questions also in terms of the news stories. What I covered just now really were the major news stories of the week. So let's take question number one from Eliana from Edison, New Jersey. She asked, do Israelis want this war with Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Iran to be waged? That's a really hard question to answer, Eliana, and I think it depends who you ask. As I've said before on this pod, the residents of the north of Israel feel completely abandoned. They've been living outside of their homes for what in 3 days will be 10 months. 10 months outside of their homes, living in youth hostels and hotels or apartments that have been rented for them or subsidized by the state. They're widely expecting that their kids will not go to their home schools, their local schools, come school time when September 1st rolls around. They want this war because they don't feel comfortable returning to the north of Israel when there is a strong Hezbollah enemy so close to the border, capable of pulling off what Hamas pulled off on October 7th. Do the rest of Israelis want the war? Look, a lot of us in the center of the country are obviously very hesitant, cautious about a war happening. We know what kind of destruction could happen. Not Hamas, Hezbollah has guided missiles that can hit our power plants, our gas resources, our universities, our public spaces, our apartment buildings. They can reach anywhere in the country. I have the luxury of living in the center of the country and not having to worry about being literally 100 meters away from the border and Hezbollah. So I can say I'd prefer there not be a war. I obviously would prefer there not be a war. But yet I sympathize with those on the border who feel that they cannot live a normal life until a war is waged. So it really does depend who you ask. Lior asked, were Israelis and the government aware of the potential danger to Israel on the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War? I alluded to this before. October 7th is actually the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War. Clearly, we were not aware of the danger of the significance of the day. Now, October 7th was not Yom Kippur, but it was the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War, which I guess means, I guess I'd have to look this up, but I guess that means that the Yom Kippur War in 1973 happened on October 7th. And we sort of ignored that. I don't think we realized that that would be a significant day for our enemies to attack us. Only in retrospect did we realize, whoa, this is the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War. Not only that, but we had a lot of intelligence. The newest item coming out within the last 24 hours is that on the night of October 6th, some of Israel's highest intelligence leaders were in the Kiryah, the war room in Tel Aviv, dealing with what they believed was a different Hamas imminent attack. So maybe this was some sort of trick by Hamas to make us think there was another attack coming that we successfully foiled only to get us the next morning. But it is coming out that on the night of October 6th, most of our intelligence leaders were in Tel Aviv dealing with a different Hamas threat. But clearly we were not aware of the significance of the date. Otherwise, we would have taken action. So here's that question I mentioned before. This is from Alan, and he asked, do Israelis ever talk about how a change to the political system in Israel is necessary so that a true majority can rule? This is a great question because a lot of why Israeli government is so messed up is because we have this coalition system. We don't have a two-party system. We have a 20, 30 party system. If you go to vote in Israel, you choose from over 30 political parties. Typically, anywhere from 12 to 20 are actually in the Knesset. But what happens is, in terms of the need to form a majority, you need to start pulling from these smaller parties to make your majority. And these smaller parties, they dictate the terms. They're the kingmakers, right? So the kingpins. So they end up with a lot of power. And you see this now with Itamar Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and these right-wingers. They have an outsized amount of power, and Netanyahu is afraid to take any action that would displease them. So yes, Israelis do talk about how we need a change of government system. Now, the other big difference, the other big problem, I would say, here in Israel is that you don't vote for politicians. You vote for the party. So you vote for Likud or you vote for Labor or Meretz. And then based on how many votes they get, they have a slate of candidates who are then seated in the Knesset. But most people can't name more than, I don't know, 10 Knesset members because we don't vote for them. We just vote for the parties. And I think this is a big problem because it means that these Knesset members don't need to be beholden to the public. They can hide behind their party without ever having to face tough questions about why they agreed with Netanyahu. They're never going to face an election where we're voting for them against someone else. So that is a big problem. And I think if you actually had to vote for the candidates here in Israel, you would have seen them break from Netanyahu earlier because their own political careers would have been on the line. Now, America is imperfect too. I'm not a big fan of the Electoral College. That that favors certain states over others and allows presidential candidates who don't have a majority of the vote to become president. It's happened too many times in the last 24 years. But alas, yeah, Israelis do talk about it, but so far nothing has been done about it. And by the way, we don't vote for the prime minister either. We vote for the party, and then the party chooses someone to be the prime minister. We know ahead of time who it's probably going to be, but we don't actually vote for that person. So, final question. Jerry asked, Joel, what do you think of Kamala Harris as a candidate? Obviously, this is just my personal opinion. I prefer Harris over Trump. A lot of Israelis want Trump to win because they think he'll just give us the munitions we need, the ammunition we need, will allow us to do whatever we want. I actually don't think it's good for Israel to be allowed to do whatever we want. I think right now we sort of have a once in a lifetime opportunity to form relations with some of the more modernized Arab countries, to have a coalition of countries rebuild Gaza and take over some of the security with us. And we're blowing that opportunity right now. And I think having a Democrat in office would be better for Israel. Now, I don't think Harris is as supportive of Israel as Biden is. I want to read you a quote from a Times of Israel story about something Kamala Harris said that bugs me. And here's the quote: "Young Americans protesting Israel's war against the Hamas terror group in Gaza are, quote, showing exactly what the human emotion should be," Harris said in an interview with The Nation. So again, Harris is saying that young Americans protesting Israel's war in Gaza are showing what human emotion should be. Now, if it had been not Hamas, but Al-Qaeda or some other terror group that was directly affecting Americans, you wouldn't see any politician saying that these protests are okay. They're actually showing what human emotion is. No, they would have talked about the horror of the terrorists and been outspoken about how terrible it is that anyone is supporting them at all. But I do think Kamala Harris is kind of playing it both ways, saying that she supports Israel, but also saying that she's giving a little too much support to the pro-Palestinian camp, in my opinion. So she's not my first choice for a Democrat to run, but if I were to vote, then ultimately in this election, I would vote for her, but really would call on the Jewish community and Israel supporters around the world, but especially in America, to put a lot of pressure on our politicians to make sure that Israel gets the support that it continues to need and deserve. But again, that is just my opinion. That wraps it up for this week's edition of Inside Israel. Again, Inside Israel takes place live every Sunday night at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. To get the links to the live broadcast, you need to sign up for my newsletter, Hebrew is Magic, and I just put the web address where you can do that. It's joelchasnoff.com/podcast. That is in the chat. And share that with other people. If you know other people who are interested in the inside story of what it's like to live in Israel and be Israeli, what Israelis are talking about behind the headlines, go ahead and send it on to them. You can also listen to this on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify. What really helps is to give it a rating on Apple and Spotify. These ratings encourage them to send that pod out on their list and to promote it. So go to Apple and Spotify and please give it whatever rating you like, hopefully a high one. But just your being there would mean a lot to me. Next week's broadcast will take place on Sunday night, August 11th at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Once again, there is a slight chance that I'm going to have to change that time. I might be going to the United States to take care of some personal business in and out, like a 48-hour trip, assuming I can actually get a flight. And if that changes, I'll of course let you know in the newsletter. But for now, we are scheduled for 5 p.m. Eastern Time next Sunday night, August 11th, 5 p.m. Eastern, midnight here in Israel. I really appreciate you joining the pod. Send in your questions ahead of time. I know we have a lot of questions in the chat tonight. What I'm going to do is leave this chat open for a few minutes. I'm going to write those down and address those next week. Thank you so much for joining. Signing off from Ra'anana, I'm Joel Chasnoff. Looking forward to seeing you next time. Until then, only peace, rak b'shalom, for all of us and all of Israel. Laila Tov.